He raised his glass, smirking, and made a joke at my expense loud enough for the whole reception to hear. My cheeks didn't flush. I'd weathered worse storms in my 68 years. I simply took a sip of champagne, knowing I'd already made a decision that would change his perfect little night. This was only the opening move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The morning sunlight spilled across my porch, catching the edges of the azaleas that had just started to bloom. The air was soft, the kind of early spring breeze that carried both warmth and a hint of the cool that had lingered all winter. I stepped outside with my coffee, slippers brushing against the worn boards, and bent to retrieve the small stack of mail from the box at the end of the walkway. Bills, a gardening catalog, and one thick cream envelope that instantly caught my eye. It was the kind of stationery you felt before you even looked. Substantial, heavy, edges embossed in gold. My heart ticked a little faster as I turned it over. The return address was my daughter's fiancé's parents' home in Atlanta. My fingers tightened slightly. I slid one finger under the flap, but the calligraphy on the front stopped me cold. Mr. and Mrs. Cole. Not Mr. and Mrs. Cole and Olivian. Not even the Cole family. Just them. My husband and me as a unit, my name swallowed whole. I'd read enough Emily Post in my time to know the formal rules of addressing invitations, and this omission didn't feel like some quaint oversight. It felt deliberate. The paper's weight seemed heavier now, pressing against my palm. I took in a slow breath, my eyes fixed on that absent word, my name. Standing there on my porch, I thought of the last few years. The way my daughter, Lila, had started calling less, visiting even less than that. Holidays where she arrived late and left early. 1,000 small signals that our connection was thinning like worn lace. But this was something else. I closed my fingers around the envelope and whispered to myself, "Is this just a mistake? Or is it a message?" Inside, I set the mail down and reached for the phone before I could talk myself out of it. Lila answered on the third ring, her voice clipped, distracted. "Hey, Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something." "It'll be quick," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I just got the wedding invitation. Lovely paper, beautiful design, but I noticed my name's missing. It's addressed only to your father and me together." A pause, then a faint sigh. "It's just how they printed it, Mom. Nothing personal. We ordered them all at once." I let out a small laugh, hoping to soften the edges. "So I suppose I'll be hiding in the coat room when the photos are taken?" Silence. Then, "Anyway, we're still figuring out the seating chart. That's actually what I need to get back to." The air between us thickened. "Right," I murmured. "Of course." We said our goodbyes, but when I set the phone down, my chest felt heavier than when I'd picked it up. There's an old saying I've always believed. Sometimes it's not what's said, it's what's not said that tells you the truth. And this truth wasn't sitting well. The next afternoon, I stopped by the small flower shop on Whitaker Street, planning to order a hand-tied bouquet for Lila to have in her dressing room on the big day. The scent of lilies and eucalyptus wrapped around me as I stepped inside. Behind the counter stood Thatcher, her fiancé's cousin, tall, sandy-haired, wearing an expression that slid from surprise to discomfort when he saw me. He was reviewing a printed sheet with the florist. "Hey, Olivian," he said, folding the paper too quickly. I smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Afternoon, Thatcher? Planning something special?" "Just finalizing the VIP guest list," he admitted, before he seemed to realize what he'd said. A corner of the paper slipped, and I caught a glimpse. Names neatly typed in 2 columns. Mine wasn't there. My husband's was. "Oh?" I tilted my head slightly. "Guess I'm not very important." His cheeks flushed. "It's just a working draft. Don't take it personally. But as I walked out with my order slip, the little bell over the door chiming behind me, I knew better. Some things aren't accidents. They're intentions with a polite bow tied around them. The sting in my chest shifted into something steadier, hotter. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the shadows lengthen over the yard. Memories slid in uninvited, being seated 3 tables away from Lila at her engagement party. Decisions about her graduation celebration made without even a courtesy call to me. I remembered the Maya Angelou quote I kept tucked in my recipe book. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I'd believed it, but I'd also hoped she'd show me something different the next time. Now, I could see the pattern for what it was, and like a seasoned poker player, I knew better than to lay all my cards on the table too early. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen as I prepped dinner. The house was quiet, just the soft clink of utensils and the simmer of the stove. My phone buzzed on the counter. A group text from the bridal party lit up the screen. VIP only rehearsal dinner, Friday night before the wedding. Attendees. The list scrolled down, name after name. My own absent again. I set the phone down carefully, my hands steady even as something inside me coiled tighter. They could treat me as though I was invisible, but I had eyes wide open. And I was paying attention. If they thought this was the end of the story, they didn't know me at all. A week after the invitation debacle, I woke to a text from my daughter. Dress fitting today, 11 a.m., Magnolia Bridal. Just like that. No hello, no how are you, not even a smiley face. Still, I clung to the hope that maybe this was her way of reaching out, a chance to smooth things over, perhaps. Magnolia Bridal sat on the corner of Whitaker Street, its wide windows draped in lace curtains, the kind that made you slow your walk just to peek inside. The moment I stepped in, the air smelled faintly of gardenias and steamed silk. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm light over racks of gowns that shimmered like clouds in the spring sun. Soft piano music floated through the space, the kind meant to soothe nerves and loosen purse strings. A young sales associate in a black sheath dress approached. Her eyes flicked to me, then over my shoulder toward the back, as if searching for someone. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her tone had a question mark at the wrong end. "I'm here for my daughter's fitting," I said, smiling politely. "Olivia and Cole." She hesitated just long enough for me to notice, then looked past me again. Her gaze caught on Malis, who was perched on a settee near the mirrored pedestal, legs crossed, phone in hand. Malis didn't wave, didn't call out a greeting, just lifted her chin a fraction, the bare minimum of acknowledgement. The associate's smile reappeared, thinner this time. "Right this way," she said, as if I'd been vetted and found acceptable. For now. I was led to a small upholstered chair in the far corner of the room, half hidden behind a rack of blush tulle. From here, the pedestal was barely visible. Between me and my daughter stood a fortress of fabric. Across the room, the groom's family occupied the prime seats, front row, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter a low hum under the music. Someone had thought to bring pastries for them. The scent of cinnamon mingled with the silk. I was offered nothing. An old Southern saying came to mind. They don't have to slam the door. Sometimes they just close it quietly in your face. I folded my hands in my lap, the smile fixed but not frozen. If they wanted me to feel like a guest at my own child's wedding, they were succeeding. But I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of squirming. The first gown was a mermaid cut, all satin sheen and dramatic train. My daughter stepped onto the pedestal, and the room erupted in little gasps and claps. I tilted my head to see her better, catching her reflection in the mirror. She looked radiant, of course. She was mine. Then, as she stepped down for adjustments, Malis turned to the groom's mother and aunt, her voice carrying just enough to reach me. "Our side of the family will just sit quietly and let the real hosts handle things." There was a ripple of soft laughter. Someone murmured agreement. I felt the words settle like a stone in my stomach. Our side. Not my side, not the family, but our side. as though I'd been excised from the frame. My eyes found my daughter's in the mirror. For a fleeting second, her expression wavered. Then she looked away, fussing with her veil. The seamstress bent to pin the hem, oblivious to the silent exchange. I took a slow breath, recalling my mother's advice. Never storm out. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Storming out would only confirm whatever lies they'd spun about me. Instead, I sat straighter, watching. Who laughed the loudest at Melis's remark? The groom's cousin, a lean man in a plaid blazer. Who stayed silent? The groom's aunt, seated at the end of the front row, her gaze darting to me with something like apology. I tucked her reaction away like a playing card in my pocket. The fitting dragged on. Lace replaced satin, sleeves replaced straps. I stayed put, clapping when appropriate, nodding at compliments from across the room that never quite reached me. Every gesture, every sidelong glance I memorized. When it was over, the guests began to drift toward the front of the boutique, chatting about brunch plans. I rose, smoothing my skirt, prepared to leave without incident. That's when the groom's aunt brushed past me in the narrow hallway. She leaned in, her perfume a soft blend of lilac and something sharper. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of garment bags. "They've been talking about the money." I froze for the smallest fraction of a second, then resumed my pace, offering her a polite nod as though she'd merely complimented my shoes. Outside, the spring sun felt warmer than it had an hour ago, but my mind was already miles ahead, fitting this new piece into the puzzle. If money was their game, they'd picked the wrong woman to underestimate. I drove home through Savannah's oak-lined streets, the branches arching overhead like cathedral beams draped with Spanish moss. Afternoon light filtered through in shifting patches, and for the first few blocks I barely noticed the beauty. My mind was replaying Melis's voice, the way she'd so casually said our side of the family at the boutique, like I was a distant cousin who'd wandered in uninvited. Was it ignorance, or was it intentional? My father had a saying for moments like this. Once is a mistake, twice is a pattern. And I had the uncomfortable feeling that I'd just witnessed the second strike. I let the car coast to a stop at a red light, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel. If there was a pattern, it hadn't started today. That meant there were other signs, things I'd brushed aside, convinced myself were nothing. The truth was, I needed to look back and see where the first crack appeared. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I left my purse on the passenger seat and just sat there, hands loose in my lap, staring at the front porch. I wasn't tired exactly, just wrapped up in thoughts heavy enough to keep me still. 6 months earlier. That's where the trail began. It had been an unseasonably warm October evening at an upscale seafood restaurant by the river. The windows framed the water like moving paintings, and the glow from the overhead lanterns cast everyone in a flattering light. Guests arrived in cocktail attire, laughter spilling over the sound of clinking glasses. I'd brought something special that night, a necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, the same one I'd worn on my own wedding day. It was tucked safely in a small velvet box in my purse, and I'd imagined the moment I'd give it to my daughter. Her eyes lighting up, the whole table seeing a mother pass down history. The groom had taken charge of the toast, tapping his glass with a spoon. "I just want to thank my family," he began, his voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation, "for making this night possible. You've supported us, guided us, and given us everything we could hope for." He raised his glass toward his parents, seated in the middle. Applause followed. He never mentioned me, not once. I saw it land on a few faces, an awkward shift in seats, a glance in my direction, the kind people give when they're wondering if you're going to make a scene. My daughter didn't step in to correct the omission. She smiled, clinked her glass with his, and Melis, sitting directly across from me, sipped her wine with a faint curl of her lips. I kept my smile polite, the kind that says I see exactly what's happening, and I'll remember it. When dessert came, I slipped the necklace box back into my purse, Some gifts are too precious to hand over when the moment's wrong. Back in the present, sitting at my kitchen table, I could see the thread running from that dinner to today. It wasn't just one or two slights. It was a series. Little exclusions that together formed a picture. There was the group text I was never added to, where brunch plans and shower details were shared. The vague responses to my offers of help. "Oh, we've got it covered," delivered with the polite finality of a closed door. And now, the seating at the boutique, with Melis's words like a stamp sealing my place outside the circle. They weren't careless, they were coordinated. The groom and Melis presented a united front, steering the narrative so I was decorative, not essential. A mother in title, but not in role. A friend of mine once told me, "Pay attention to what they don't say as much as what they do." At the time, I'd thought she meant it for gossip or secrets. Now I understood. Silence can be just as deliberate as words. I opened my journal, the one I kept for recipes and family notes, and turned to a blank page. Date, event, who was there, what was said or not said. I started writing it all down. The dinner toast, the missing group text, the boutique seating, Melis's comment. I even noted the sympathetic look from the groom's aunt and the whispered warning in the hallway. The list was short now, but I knew it would grow. Documentation meant clarity, and clarity meant power. I wasn't ready to confront anyone yet. That would be playing my hand too soon. Strategy was better than impulse. In my mind, I pictured a chessboard. Right now, I was watching the pawns move, the opening gambits. They thought they were nudging me toward the edge, but they hadn't noticed how closely I was studying the board. People who think you're not paying attention tend to get sloppy. I had just set my pen down when the phone rang. The caller ID lit up with my daughter's name. My thumb hovered over the answer button, my heart giving a small, unexpected kick. Was this another casual summons, another chance to be seated in the corner, or was it something else entirely? When I answered, her voice was too bright, the kind of cheer that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mom," she said, "there's something you need to know before the wedding." Her words hung there, dangling between possibility and warning. And all I could think was, when people start warning you late in the game, it's either to save you or themselves. The phone stayed against my ear for a full breath before I managed to say anything. "Hello," I answered, aiming for the even tone I'd perfected over the last few months. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was chipper. Too chipper. It had been a long time since she'd spoken to me without that faint edge of impatience, and the sudden change felt like a costume she'd put on. "There's something you need to know before the wedding," she said. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the darkening yard beyond the kitchen window. "Is this about the seating chart?" I asked. "Or something bigger?" Silence stretched for a beat. "Bigger," she admitted. "But I think it's better if we meet in person, somewhere we can talk without interruptions." My hand traced the rim of my coffee mug, the ceramic cool against my skin. "Fine. Where?" "There's that little cafe by the river, the one with the cinnamon rolls you like. Tomorrow morning? 9? I agreed, and we exchanged quick goodbyes. After hanging up, I stayed at the table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering what made her break the unspoken wall between us. The next morning was overcast, the kind of gray that made colors look muted. The cafe was small, wood-paneled, the kind of place where the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee seemed baked into the walls. I arrived early, choosing a table near the back where I could see the door. She came in 12 minutes late, glancing over her shoulder before she spotted me. Her coat was buttoned tight despite the mild weather, and her hair looked like she'd run a hand through it one too many times. "Traffic," she said as she slid into the seat across from me. We made small talk about the weather, about how the river had been high last week. It was the kind of conversation you have with a stranger at a bus stop, not with your own daughter. When the waitress brought our coffees, I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep in. Across from me, she stirred hers without tasting it, eyes fixed on the swirl of cream. Finally, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "You might not like what you're about to hear." I kept my expression neutral. "Then say it plainly." She glanced toward the counter, then back at me. "The groom and Malis, they've been talking about how to manage you at the wedding. Making sure you don't give any speeches, keeping things controlled." The words didn't surprise me as much as I thought they would. Controlled how? Her jaw tightened. "They've been asking questions about the money you promised. The 90,000. I think they're trying to find a way to handle it, maybe even redirect it, without you having much say." I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time. That's a lot of speculation. "I wouldn't be here if it was just gossip," she said, her tone sharpening. "I've heard them. They think if they keep you on the sidelines, they can make their own arrangements." There was guilt in her eyes, but also something defensive, as though she was bracing for me to lash out. I didn't give her that satisfaction. I simply nodded, letting the information settle. My grandmother used to say, "Forewarned is forearmed." I could almost hear her voice now, steady and knowing. Whether my daughter was trying to protect me or herself, the effect was the same. I'd been given a map before the storm hit. The 90,000 was no longer a gift in my mind. It was a lever, and levers only work when you keep a firm grip. "Thank you for telling me," I said, keeping my voice even. "I appreciate it." Her shoulders eased slightly, as though my calm was permission for her to relax. She didn't need to know what I was already planning, how I'd let them underestimate me until the moment I chose otherwise. When we stood to leave, she hugged me, an action so rare I nearly missed the moment to return it. As we stepped apart, she whispered, "Just be careful." I noticed then a small envelope slip from her bag onto the chair. She saw it too and scooped it up quickly. My eyes caught the handwriting before it disappeared, the groom's name in Malis's looping script. She mumbled something about having errands to run and left in a hurry, her coat swishing behind her. I watched her go, the bell over the cafe door jingling in her wake. Walking back to my car, I replayed every word, every pause, every flicker of expression. The air smelled of river silt and pastry, a strange mix that clung to my senses. I slid into the driver's seat and rested my hands on the steering wheel. If they thought I was the silent type, they were about to learn silence has its sharp edges. By the time I reached the church, the late afternoon light had taken on that warm, golden hue that makes even cracked sidewalks look romantic. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, the pearls my mother had worn on her own wedding day resting at my collarbone. They weren't flashy, but they had weight, the kind that came from years of being worn during moments that mattered. Savannah's historic church loomed ahead, white steeple against the fading sky, stained glass windows that caught the sun like molten jewels. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and old hymnals. I paused just inside the vestibule, letting my eyes adjust to the glow. The groom was in the aisle, laughing with a cluster of guests. When his gaze landed on me, the smile tightened. A quick nod, no more. A few steps behind him, Milas leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Both their eyes flicked in my direction before they looked away, their conversation resuming as if I'd never arrived. At the front of the church, place cards marked where each family member should sit. Mine was all the way to the side, nearly hidden behind a pillar. I touched the back of the pew, feeling the cool wood under my palm. They want me invisible before the wedding even begins. The walkthrough began, everyone milling into place. When it was time for family photos, I stepped forward, waiting for my turn. The photographer glanced at his clipboard, then at me. "We'll get to you later," he said, already waving over another group. Later never came. From somewhere near the altar, I caught the tail end of a chuckle, one of the groom's friends saying, "Save the best seats for real family." A ripple of muted laughter followed. I didn't need to know exactly who joined in. The tone was enough. Across the aisle, a few guests met my eyes with sympathetic smiles. I returned a polite nod, keeping my back straight. This wasn't the moment to flinch. Instead, I folded my hands in front of me, studying the light through the stained glass. Let them think I was distracted. Let them think I didn't notice. When the group shifted toward the reception hall for the second half of the rehearsal, I made my move. The wedding planner was reviewing the table arrangements with the groom, clearly on edge. I stepped in with a warm smile. "I have to say, the flower choices are just perfect," I said to her, making sure my voice carried. "So much better than the heavy arrangements you see in some weddings. These feel elegant." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the groom's jaw twitch. I remembered him complaining about those very flowers weeks ago. I drifted from table to table, engaging with guests I knew held sway, business partners of the groom's family, old friends of mine who still held affection for my daughter. I told light-hearted stories from her childhood, the kind that painted me as a constant, caring presence. "This one," I said, pointing at a photo on someone's phone, "was taken the summer she decided she wanted to be a vet. We ended up with a makeshift clinic in our garage. Every stray cat in the neighborhood knew where to go." People laughed, leaning in. I noted who responded with genuine warmth and who simply smiled out of politeness. It was a chessboard, and I was mapping the pieces. I was halfway through a conversation about the church's architecture when a young man approached me. A cousin of the groom, if I remembered correctly. He waited until we were slightly apart from the others. "I've noticed," he said quietly, "how they've been treating you." I studied his face for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Not exactly subtle, are they?" He chuckled. "The groom likes control, always has. Just thought you should know. You're not imagining it." I sipped my water, buying time. "Appreciate the concern, but I can handle myself." "Still," he added, "if you ever want to be kept in the loop about certain conversations." I shook my head gently. "Kind offer, but I'll manage. Information's more useful when people don't know you have it." He grinned, clearly amused. "Fair enough. Just know I've got a good memory." We parted on a polite note, but I filed away his words. Allies could be valuable, but they could also tangle the board if you didn't keep them in check. As the rehearsal drew to a close, the groom called for everyone's attention. He held a revised seating chart like it was a prize. "We're making a few changes," he announced, "for the flow of the ceremony." My name had been moved even farther back, this time almost in the last row. A murmur went through the room, and I caught a few sidelong glances in my direction. I let a small smile touch my lips. "Of course," I said evenly. "Whatever you think is best." Inside, my thoughts were sharp and deliberate. Let them think they've won the first move. I gathered my things slowly, letting the crowd disperse ahead of me. When I stepped into the cool evening air, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single line. "You're not the only one watching them." I stared at it for a long moment, the words settling like a stone in my chest. Then I slipped the phone into my bag and walked to my car, my pace unhurried. The game had just widened. The morning air was crisp enough to sting my cheeks as I stepped out of the cab in front of the reception hall. Sunlight bounced off the frost still clinging to the grass, giving the whole street a faint shimmer. I'd arrived earlier than anyone else on purpose. If I was going to be part of this day, I wanted to do it on my own terms. My assigned role in the ceremony had been clear. I would walk my daughter down the aisle. It wasn't just symbolic. It was my way of standing beside her in a moment she'd remember for the rest of her life. Inside, the hall was a low hum of movement. Florists fluffing hydrangeas, waiters arranging glassware, a string quartet testing their sound near the stage. The scent of fresh greenery mixed with the faint tang of polish from the newly cleaned floors. I waved to the wedding planner, but she ducked her head and disappeared behind a column. That was my first red flag. While adjusting the ribbon on a nearby arrangement, The florist leaned closer. "You might want to check in with them," she said under her breath. "There have been some updates." I held her gaze for a beat. Nothing good ever starts with updates. By the time I made my way toward the prep area, a small cluster of family members had formed. The groom stood at the center, his tone clipped, eyes scanning a sheet of paper. "Quick family meeting," he announced. "We've made a few tweaks to the ceremony order." I folded my hands, waiting. "For the walk down the aisle," he continued, "we're going to have Uncle Roy escort her. It'll flow better for the photos that way." My jaw didn't tighten, not visibly. I simply inclined my head, as though he'd just told me the weather forecast. Inside, the words landed like a fist. "Of course," I said evenly. From somewhere behind me, a voice muttered, "That's not right." I didn't turn to see who said it. The affirmation was enough. I excused myself, stepping toward a quiet corner, phone in hand to give the illusion of busyness. The reflection in the window showed me composed, but my ears caught the sound of laughter from the hallway. "Not letting her steal the spotlight," the groom's mother said, her voice pitched in mockery. He chuckled in response. "Exactly. This is our day, not hers." Their words clicked into place with every slight from the rehearsal, every calculated move to keep me at arm's length. And beneath it all was the reminder of the $90,000 gift I'd promised. The one thing I suspected kept them from being even bolder. That money was leverage, and they knew it. For now, I let the thought settle like a stone at the bottom of a pond. Confrontation would only give them the scene they wanted. On my way back through the reception hall, I paused near the entryway, catching fragments of a hushed conversation between the wedding planner and the groom. "And the check needs to clear before we confirm the ice sculpture," she said, her voice low. "It will," he replied. "She's already committed. Just tell the vendors to proceed." I stilled, my pulse thudding in my ears. An ice sculpture? That had never been discussed with me. As I listened, the list of upgrades spilled out. Things I hadn't approved, hadn't even heard about. Champagne fountains, imported orchids, a custom dessert table flown in from New York. They were treating my gift like a blank check, making promises on my behalf. And now I saw it clearly. Removing me from the spotlight wasn't about ceremony flow. It was about stripping away any perception that I had influence here. If I was sidelined, no one would question who was footing the bill. I smiled faintly to myself, the expression more of a sharpened blade than warmth. Let them think I was still committed. Let them keep building their little house of cards. The air outside was cooler now, the sun higher but the breeze brisk enough to carry the scent of coffee from a nearby cafe. I stood on the steps for a moment, inhaling deeply, the sting in my lungs clearing the fog from my mind. The insults still burned, but so did the clarity. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. If you want to see the full picture, meet me by the catering truck at 1 p.m. I read it twice, then tucked the phone into my clutch. The same mystery contact from yesterday. Whoever it was, they were watching closely, maybe even closer than I'd realized. Stepping back inside, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Calm eyes, steady mouth, shoulders squared. "If they think I'm cornered," I murmured under my breath, "they're about to learn how wrong they are." I rejoined the crowd, the noise of last-minute preparations swirling around me. Every laugh, every whispered aside, every stolen glance only sharpened my focus. The storm they thought they'd avoided was already forming, quiet, deliberate, and entirely mine to unleash. I slipped out of the main hall just as the string quartet began rehearsing the processional again. The chatter of guests faded behind me, replaced by the muffled shuffle of staff moving through the service corridors. My heels clicked on the tiled floor as I followed the scent of roasting meat and warm bread. It grew stronger with each turn until the air was heavy with the smell of garlic and herbs, comforting under normal circumstances, but today it only heightened the knot in my stomach. I passed crates stacked against the wall, linens bundled in plastic, a utility cart abandoned mid-hallway. The contrast between the candlelit elegance inside, And the cluttered practicality back here was jarring, like seeing the seams of a dress you'd only admired from the front. When I stepped outside into the service lot, the sunlight hit hard, bouncing off the asphalt. The catering truck loomed at the far end, its side door propped open. A figure stood just inside the shadowed doorway, arms folded. I recognized her faintly. A flash of her face from earlier, maybe in the flurry of setup. If this is a trap, I thought, at least I'll know who set it. "Mrs. Harlow?" she asked as I approached. "That depends on who's asking," I replied, stopping just short of the truck's shadow. She stepped forward, extending a hand. "Carla, I'm a friend of one of the bridesmaids. Also help out here sometimes with event setup." I shook her hand, wary but curious. "And you pulled me away from a wedding for... what exactly?" Her voice lowered. "Because there are things you need to know before this ceremony starts." I tilted my head, reading her expression. No smirk, no hint of mischief, just a sharp, earnest edge. "I've been around since yesterday," she continued. "I overheard conversations you weren't meant to hear. The groom's family. They've been working on pushing you out of the picture since the engagement." "That's a bold claim," I said, though it felt more like confirmation than surprise. "They think the big gift you promised means you'll put up with anything, that you'll smile for the photos no matter how they treat you." I kept my tone flat. "And why are you telling me this?" Carla's mouth tightened. "Because what they're doing isn't just tacky, it's cruel. And I've seen enough brides get steamrolled by family politics. This time, it's the mother of the bride. That doesn't sit right with me." I crossed my arms. "Go on." She glanced around, then spoke quickly. "At the rehearsal dinner, there was a little meeting. Groom, his mother, the planner. His mom pitched this idea about presenting you with a public check. Said it would be a nice way to acknowledge your gift." I could imagine the smirk in her voice as Carla mimicked it. "But the real point was to make it seem like you're just a bank account, not part of the family. They even joked about how you'd probably cry and how that would look touching in photos." My stomach turned, but my face stayed still. "And the ceremony role? They replaced you weeks ago. Waited until today to tell you so you wouldn't make a fuss. I heard it straight from the planner. They wanted to avoid giving you any time to push back." Carla pulled out her phone, thumb swiping through her files until a recording played. Muffled, but clear enough. The groom's laugh, his mother's voice dripping with satisfaction. "She won't see it coming." The sound of them together sent a deep chill down my spine. This wasn't an accident. This was staged humiliation. I handed the phone back slowly. "Thank you for this." Her brows lifted. "You're taking it better than I expected." Inside, the anger was hot and steady, but I'd long since learned that showing it only gave people more to work with. "I've had practice," I said. Her eyes softened a fraction. "They really think you're just going to let this happen?" I glanced toward the hall, the faint music carrying over the lot. "They've underestimated the value of a quiet woman with time to think." Memories surfaced unbidden, other slights, other rooms where I'd been talked over, other times when people mistook restraint for weakness. Every one of them was a brick in the wall of my resolve. I thought about the $90,000 gift, the vendors, the whispers about upgrades I'd never approved. It wasn't just about today anymore. It was about setting boundaries they'd never forget. Carla slipped a small card into my palm. "That's my number. I can send you the audio files, and if I hear anything else before the ceremony, I'll text you." I closed my fingers around it. "You've done more than enough already, and I promise I'll make good use of this." We shared a brief, understanding look, two women on the same page for entirely different reasons. As I made my way back toward the hall, the sounds of clinking glasses and laughter drifted out. From here, it sounded almost mocking. Through the open doors, I caught sight of the groom in the middle of a group, his arms slung casually around his mother's shoulders. They were basking in their own version of the day's perfection. You think you've staged the perfect day, I thought, but let's see how it looks when the script changes. I stepped inside just as the DJ's voice boomed. All right, folks, let's get ready for our pre-ceremony photos. Perfect timing. My first move would be quiet, invisible to most, but it would set the tone for everything that followed. The photographer's voice rang out over the low hum of conversation. Dolores, could you step to the center, please? We want you in a special family shot. I felt every head turn in my direction. The bright umbrella lights above cast a heat that made my skin prickle. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked forward, each step a small performance I hadn't agreed to give. The guests shifted, making a narrow path. Their smiles weren't warm, more like the expectant grins you see before a magician pulls a rabbit from a hat. Off to the side, the groom's mother stood with the best man, their heads tilted together, whispering like schoolchildren with a secret. She caught my eye and smiled, too broadly, too knowingly. I thought of Carla's warning behind the catering truck. They've set a stage. I just don't know the script yet. But I knew my role wasn't meant to be flattering. The anticipation in the air was almost tangible. They weren't waiting for a sweet family moment. They were waiting for a punchline. The photographer gestured for me to stand front and center, directly under the brightest light. My pulse quickened, not from nerves but from suspicion. I had learned long ago, when people go out of their way to put you in the spotlight, it's often to watch you trip. Ladies and gentlemen, the best man's voice boomed through the hall. Before we take this very special photo, we have a token of appreciation for Dolores. A ripple of polite applause swept through the guests. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides, my expression neutral. From the corner of my eye, I saw a catering staff member approach, not with a formal envelope or gift box, but with a small, shiny gift bag decorated with neon balloons. It looked like something snatched from the clearance aisle of a party store. They handed it to me with exaggerated ceremony. Soft chuckles rose from the groom's side of the family. My gaze flicked toward the actual gift table in the corner, and my stomach tightened. The envelope containing the ceremonial check presentation I'd prepared was nowhere to be seen. In that instant, the pieces clicked. They'd stolen my intended moment of honor and replaced it with this. A petty sideshow. Oh, come on, open it! Someone from the groom's side called. I drew a slow breath, meeting the photographer's uneasy glance before tearing the tissue paper aside. Inside was a mug, cheap ceramic, bright white with bold black letters, "World's Okayest Mom." Laughter erupted, louder this time. Some guests looked down, embarrassed. Others didn't bother hiding their amusement. From behind me, the groom's voice rang out, deliberately loud. We know you're not about big shows, so here's something small, just like you like it. A smattering of laughter followed. My mind flashed back to Carla's words, a public check moment to humiliate you. Only now it was worse. It was dressed as humor. The photographer hesitated, camera poised midair. Should I? Keep snapping, the groom's mother said brightly. So I did what they didn't expect. I smiled, slow, deliberate, unbothered, and held the mug up like it was a prize from the state fair. Well, I said clearly, my voice carrying just enough to reach the back of the room. This will go perfectly with my morning coffee and my patience. The tone shifted. A few guests laughed with me this time, their laughter a shade different, less at me, more at the awkwardness of the moment. Someone near the front even clapped lightly. I locked eyes with the groom's mother, still holding the mug high. If she thought I'd flush with embarrassment, she'd miscalculated. You can't humiliate someone who refuses to play along. Well then, I said cheerfully, shall we get that family photo? The photographer snapped quickly, perhaps eager to capture the moment before it soured again. I placed the mug down on the stage edge, right in clear view of the cameras, and stepped back into position. As soon as the photo wrapped, I excused myself with a warm smile. "Just need to make a quick call," I told the photographer. My heels tapped a steady rhythm toward the exit. Guests parted politely, their curiosity barely disguised. I kept the mug in my hand like it was a trophy. Each step away from the center of that hall felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they'd hoped to strip away. Near the doorway, I spotted the wedding coordinator, clipboard in hand, headset slightly askew. I approached with the kind of calm that comes just before a storm. "Could we talk about the vendor settlements?" I asked. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Vendor settlements?" "Yes," I said lightly, as though discussing the weather. "Given my contributions, I just want to be sure everything is on schedule." Her eyes darted toward the hall, then back to me. "That's actually something we need to discuss urgently." I smiled, a real one this time, not for their cameras, but for myself. The pieces were sliding into place. They'd written a script for me today, but I was already drafting my own ending. I slipped out of the main hall with the mug still in hand, my steps unhurried. "Just need to take a call," I'd told the photographer earlier, and no one questioned it. The music faded with each stride, replaced by the distant clink of glassware and the muffled laughter of people who thought the night belonged to them. The hallway was dimmer, lined with framed photographs of past celebrations, a parade of smiling brides and grooms frozen in time. One shot caught me, a black and white image from the early '80s, the bride's veil cascading like water. For a moment, I was back in my own wedding dress, before life had stripped away illusions about permanence. I adjusted the strap of my purse and mentally rehearsed the conversation ahead. The lines were crisp in my mind. They thought I'd come here to give, but I came prepared to take back. And if they thought the little mug stunt was their final move, they had no idea the game had barely begun. I reached the small administrative office tucked behind the catering prep area. The faint smell of coffee and printer ink greeted me. Inside, the coordinator sat behind a desk, her eyes glued to a spreadsheet on her laptop. "Got a minute?" I asked. She looked up, smiling automatically. "Of course. Everything going smoothly for you?" "Actually," I stepped in, closing the door gently behind me. "I wanted to check on the vendor settlements tied to my gift." Her brows knit. "Vendor settlements?" "Yes, the payments to the florist band and so on that were covered under my contribution." She flipped open a thick ledger and scrolled on her screen simultaneously. Those funds haven't been processed yet." "We were waiting on your final approval before disbursement." I feigned mild surprise. "Oh, I assumed the couple already knew the terms." Her eyes flickered with curiosity. "Terms?" I leaned slightly over the desk. "The funds are contingent on certain formalities, a proper public presentation, acknowledgement, and some minor conditions in writing." The coordinator's gaze shifted, unsure. "Given the events tonight," I continued smoothly, "I'd like to place an immediate hold on any disbursement until I've had a chance to review everything in detail." She hesitated, tapping her pen against the desk. "That's doable, but it'll definitely raise questions." "I'm counting on it," I said with a small, knowing smile. From my purse, I drew a folder, neat, precise, everything in order. Inside were copies of contracts, my original check, and a signed letter laying out the conditions of the gift. She took it, scanning the first page, and her eyes widened. "They didn't mention this at all," she murmured. "Of course not," I replied evenly. "Why ruin their surprise?" I tapped the clause highlighted in yellow. "Any breach allows me to reclaim the funds, and I have reason to believe there's been a breach." Her lips parted, then closed again. She seemed to be weighing whether to ask questions or simply comply. "Just freeze the release until after the weekend," I instructed. "We'll revisit it Monday." She slid a form across to me, and I signed with steady strokes. Inside, I savored the ease of it. Their arrogance had made my part almost effortless. Leaving the office, I retraced my steps toward the main hall. Near the bar, I caught the tail end of a sharp exchange between the groom's mother and the best man. "I don't care what you thought she'd do," she was hissing. "Just fix it." The air in the hall felt different now. The laughter was thinner, the conversations more fragmented. A few guests glanced at me, then away, the way people do when they've just heard a rumor and aren't sure if it's true. I kept my smile polite as I slipped back into the crowd. My place at the head table was still gone, replaced by a generic banquet chair pushed awkwardly to the side. Let them keep the seat, I thought. I'll keep the check. I mingled for a few minutes, chatting idly with guests about the band, the flowers, the weather. All the while, I could sense the undercurrent shifting, like a tide beginning to pull away from shore. Then he appeared, the groom, his shoulders tight, his jaw set in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He approached with a measured stride, stopping just close enough for his words to be heard only by me. "I heard there's a problem with the payment?" His tone was controlled, but there was a tremor under it. I picked up my water glass, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "Not a problem," I said lightly. "Just a review." "Timing is everything, isn't it?" He swallowed hard. "We have obligations tonight." I met his gaze steadily. "So do I." Before he could respond, a voice boomed from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for the toast." The groom gave me one last sharp look before turning toward the crowd. I turned as well, my face the picture of composure. Inside, I was already thinking, by the time this night is over, they'll wish they never tried to play me. The maid of honor's voice floated through the speakers, warm and trembling with sentiment. "Love and gratitude," she began, raising her glass. "That's what today is about. Gratitude for family, for the people who—" From across the table, I caught the groom leaning toward his bride, his lips moving quickly, eyes darting toward me. His whisper wasn't as discreet as he thought. The microphone in front of them caught enough to make a few heads turn. "We need to handle this." His voice leaked through the sound system, fractured but audible. A few guests blinked in confusion. The bride's smile froze, her knuckles whitening around the stem of her champagne flute. She muttered something back, but her voice wavered just enough to crack the image of effortless happiness. The maid of honor hesitated mid-sentence, glanced between them, then awkwardly finished her toast with a strained laugh. I kept my expression soft, one hand resting lightly on my glass, the other folded in my lap. A ripple of murmurs traveled through the tables. They didn't need me to speak. The silence spoke louder. The groom stood abruptly and reached for the mic. "If I could just clarify something," he began, eyes scanning the room as though it were a courtroom and we were all waiting for the verdict. "There have been some unexpected complications with certain promises made." Several people leaned back in their chairs, brows raised. Promises. At a wedding? It wasn't lost on anyone that his gaze kept flicking in my direction. I spotted a couple of older guests, friends of my late husband, sharing a look. People from my generation know that certain matters are handled privately, not dissected in front of 100 witnesses. The groom didn't seem to understand the damage he was doing with every syllable. He tried to spin it as a minor misunderstanding, but the defensiveness in his tone made it sound like a confession. My eyes stayed steady on him, a faint, polite smile in place. Inside, I was thinking, he's unraveling faster than I imagined. By the time he handed the mic back, the air had shifted. The buzz of conversation didn't return to its previous warmth. It was thinner now, edged with caution. Within minutes, I had 3 different people approach me. One woman, a cousin from the bride's side, touched my arm gently. "You all right, dear?" "I'm fine," I said with practiced calm, neither confirming nor denying the rumors forming like storm clouds above us. Then came the bride's aunt, a formidable woman in a navy dress. She took my hand in both of hers. "You deserved better treatment, dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her voice was low but firm, and the squeeze she gave my fingers carried the weight of quiet allegiance. I noticed others shifting seats, subtly repositioning themselves closer to my table. The laughter around the room was more contained now, the glances toward the couple tinged with something between curiosity and judgment. Between dances, the groom appeared again, his smile stretched taut like a rope ready to snap. He leaned in, speaking through gritted teeth. "Can you fix this before the night's over?" "There's nothing broken on my end," I replied, tilting my head just slightly. His jaw flexed, eyes narrowing. The silence stretched between us, deliberate on my part, suffocating for him. Then I rose smoothly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to greet someone who just arrived." I stepped away without waiting for a response, feeling the heat of his frustration even with my back turned. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his hands clench at his sides before he disappeared into the crowd. Not long after, the bride made her way toward me. Her expression was perfectly composed, almost too composed, the kind you wear when you've decided what role you'll play before stepping into the scene. I set down my drink and met her halfway across the polished floor. For a moment, we simply stood there, two women from different worlds but bound together, however unwillingly, by the events of this evening. I wasn't sure if her next words would be an apology whispered through gritted teeth or an accusation wrapped in sugar. But before she could speak, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "Let's welcome our newlyweds to the floor for the next dance!" The room erupted in polite applause, the moment suspended like a glass about to tip. She leaned closer, her perfume mixing with the faint scent of champagne. "You don't know what you've started," she murmured, so softly only I could hear. My brows lifted, not in fear, but in genuine intrigue. Her perfume reached me before her words did, soft, floral, and just faint enough to feel deliberate. She leaned in, her lips so close to my ear it almost felt like an embrace to anyone watching. This wasn't my idea, it was his. Her eyes flicked toward the groom, who was pretending to engage in conversation with a groomsman while sneaking glances in our direction. I didn't answer. I simply held her gaze, letting the implication hang between us like a heavy curtain. Her eyes shimmered, not quite tears, but something caught there, as if she'd rehearsed holding them back. Around us, the music swelled and couples twirled under the soft lights. No one else seemed aware that in the middle of this joyful chaos, a fault line had just cracked open at my feet. She drew back, her expression smoothing into the same polished smile she'd worn all night. "Can we step somewhere quieter?" she asked, already motioning toward the side corridor near the coat check. I followed her, our heels clicking in uneven rhythm on the polished floor. The muffled thump of bass faded as we turned the corner, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses replaced by the soft hum of an air vent. Once we were alone, she exhaled sharply, the smile gone. "He wanted to embarrass you tonight," she said flatly. "He thought if he pushed you far enough you'd cancel the gift." I stayed silent, studying her face. Her lipstick was still perfect, her hair still in place, but the tension around her mouth gave her away. "I didn't think it would go this far," she continued. "I thought maybe it would be a jab or two, something you'd brush off, but he—" Her voice faltered. "He's been wound tight for weeks." I let her speak, but my mind was already sorting through her choice of words. She wasn't taking ownership. She was carefully separating herself from his actions, like a lawyer creating distance from a guilty client. "Why tell me this now?" I asked finally. "Because," she said, "I think you need to know what you're dealing with. And because—" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to go down with him." That, I thought, was the first honest thing she'd said all night. Her gaze darted toward the reception hall, as if afraid someone might be watching. "He's not as secure as he lets on," she whispered. "Financially, I mean. That $90,000? It wasn't for the wedding. It was going to cover debts he hasn't told anyone about. If it doesn't come through, there will be consequences." My late husband's words floated into my mind. When someone shows you their desperation, believe it. And what do you expect me to do with this? I asked. I'm saying, she leaned in again. If you could find a way to help me avoid what's coming, I'd be willing to make things right between us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She had just handed me something far more valuable than an apology. Leverage. Two kinds, in fact. The canceled gift and her confession. We walked back into the reception side by side, our smiles back in place like nothing had happened. The groom's eyes tracked us immediately, suspicion flaring. A few guests noticed something in the way we re-entered but couldn't quite place it. Before he could intercept, an old family friend swept me into a dance. Haven't seen you move in years, he teased. I laughed, letting the moment play out. From across the room, I could see the bride and groom standing together but not speaking, their bodies angled away from each other. The song ended and I thanked my partner, making my way toward the refreshment table. That's when I saw the photographer crouched in a corner, reviewing shots on a laptop. One image caught my eye, a close frame of the bride, her mouth inches from my ear, my expression unreadable. Nice shot, I said casually. You want a copy? No charge, the photographer offered. It's a strong moment, I smiled. Yes, send it to me. As I turned away, I knew that photograph might be the final piece I'd need. The MC's voice rang out over the hum of conversation. And now, we invite close family to share a few words before the cake cutting. My stomach settled into a calm I hadn't felt all night. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Across the room, the groom stood with that same smug tilt of his chin, certain that I'd either choke back my pride or mumble something polite to save face. I rose from my chair slowly, letting my hand rest on the stem of my glass. A soft chime echoed as I tapped it with a silver fork, once, twice, until the crowd began to turn my way. The laughter softened to a hush. All that remained was the faint clink of silverware being set down. I smiled as though I'd been waiting all evening for this moment. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank each of you for coming together to celebrate this day. Weddings are rare moments when we can see love surrounded by community. I let my eyes sweep the room. People smiled back, shoulders relaxing. I wish the couple joy and partnership for all their days ahead. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the tables. They thought this would be harmless. That's exactly where I wanted them. I drew a breath and let my tone shift, subtle but sharp enough for attentive ears to catch it. But joy, I continued, cannot be built on lies. A few heads tilted. I could see the groom stiffen. Tonight, I was made the target of a public humiliation. A little display meant to embarrass me into silence. My words were steady, each one deliberate. What you may not have noticed is the moment I learned the truth about why I was here. From my clutch, I produced a printed photo, captured earlier that night, the bride leaning toward me, lips near my ear, my expression unreadable. The image was clear, undeniable. I held it up so the nearest tables could see, passing it toward the MC, who looked confused but obliged in showing it to others. This, I said, was when the bride told me it wasn't her idea, it was his. I gestured toward the groom. Gasps rustled through the room, and a low hum of whispers began to build. The groom took a step forward, hand half raised as if to cut me off. I met his movement with a single raised palm. No, you'll have your turn, but not until I'm finished. My voice didn't rise, but the authority in it made him freeze. Before tonight, I went on, I had intended to give the couple a gift, a contribution to start their life on solid ground, $90,000. A few guests inhaled sharply. But what I learned tonight changed everything. That money was never meant for a shared future. It was intended to cover debts he has hidden, debts that would have been buried under the pretense of a wedding. I let the silence hang for just long enough. So instead, I've redirected the funds. This morning, I made a donation to the Children's Literacy Alliance in this city, in honor of my late husband. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, applause from a cluster of guests near the back. It spread unevenly, some clapping, others frozen in shock. The groom's parents sat stiff, faces pale, while the bride remained perfectly still beside him. I took one step closer to the head table, looking directly at the man who had tried to humiliate me. "If you wanted to see me humiliated, you'll have to try harder." It was then the bride moved, slowly at first, then with a determination that cut through the static in the air. She stepped away from his side, turning to face the guests. "She's right," she said, her voice carrying. "I can't marry a man like this." The room erupted in murmurs, a sharp chorus of surprise. His face drained of color, jaw tightening as he glanced around, desperate for someone to step in. She took off her bouquet and placed it gently on the table in front of him. "I should have listened to my instincts sooner. Thank you," she said to me, calm, almost businesslike. Phones were out now. Guests had started recording, some holding their devices low, others brazenly capturing every second. I knew this scene would live far beyond tonight. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, stepping back and letting the weight of her decisions settle over the room. When the murmurs grew into a swell of chaos, voices clashing, chairs scraping, I turned toward the exit. A couple of relatives who'd quietly supported me all evening rose to walk with me, forming an unspoken escort through the crowd. The cool air of the corridor was a relief after the heat of so many eyes. At the coat check, I reached for my wrap just as the photographer appeared, holding a small flash drive between two fingers. "This has the photo from earlier," he said, "and a few extras I think you might want to see." I arched an eyebrow. "Extras?" He lowered his voice. "Shots from last night's rehearsal dinner. He wasn't alone when he left. You can see for yourself." I took the drive, feeling its weight despite how light it was. "Thank you." As I stepped out into the night, tucking it safely into my bag, a slow smile formed. This evening's chapter had closed, but the story, it seemed, wasn't quite over.